You were just talking about how you moved into taking the next step and coming back into an active role in politics to try to affect change, to deal with the nation's woes. There's been a good deal of time since you were defeated in an attempt to return to Congress, and now. What's been your process during this time? What's gone on with you that's now brought you to take a more independent or approach to coming back to joining the government?
First of all, I have to say that I've always been involved in politics because as a child of the civil rights movement, I've seen what politics can do. I've seen what government can do. My father participated in civil rights demonstrations all across the South. And when those civil rights demonstrations came to Atlanta, Georgia, then I participated in them too. My father also was one of the first black police officers in the city of Atlanta. And he would challenge the personal indignities that he had to suffer every day. Oftentimes what that meant was that he had to challenge them alone because other people were too afraid to challenge them with him. So my father would protest whatever the policies at the Atlanta Police Department were. And that sometimes meant that he had to protest in his uniform. That sometimes meant that he had to protest in his uniform all alone. And with me sitting on his shoulder, he did that. But it always meant that when he protested in his uniform, with me sitting on his shoulder, all alone, that he had to watch somebody else get the benefit of what he was protesting for. That is the notion of service without expectation of reward. You can't expect to get the reward because I've seen that he never got the reward. He served 20 years as a policeman. He came in as a patrolman and he left as a patrolman. But when he left, the city of Atlanta had hundreds of black police officers, had a black police commissioner, and eventually went on to have a black police chief. That was all the work of my father, who started policing at a time when black police officers couldn't change their uniforms at the Atlanta Police Department headquarters. He had to go down the street to the Black Y, and that's why he had to protest in his uniform, because he didn't want to take the time to walk to the Y and walk back and then protest, because he would be losing precious time, precious minutes of protest time. My father went to serve in World War II, went to Europe. When he came back, he decided, flew back, then took a train from New York down to Georgia. In South Carolina, he decided he wanted to see what the white water tasted like. So he and some of his friends got off the train, still in their army uniforms, and they drank from the white water fountain. They were arrested. And my father was arrested. And he found out that the white water was no different than the black water, but he also found that in order to discover that, he had to go to jail. His activism in the civil rights movement, then I didn't see anything else to do but also to become active in the civil rights movement. And then one day my dad had an idea, and that idea was that I won't protest public policy, I'll make public policy. And when he had that very transformative idea, it was before the passage of the Voting Rights Act. So he would run for office, and the decks were stacked against someone like him being elected. He ran for office 2 times before the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and he lost both times. The state of Georgia has a long history of involvement with the Supreme Court and with the Justice Department over issues of blacks having the right to vote. And the state of Georgia has a long history in denial of blacks with the right to vote. But then, in August of 1965, something happened. And that is that Lyndon Baines Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act. And immediately, the structure of justice changed in this country. And it changed for me in a very personal way, because I had seen my father run for office 2 times, and 2 times he lost. But then because of redistricting, because of the Voting Rights Act, redistricting had to be done in a different way. Voter registration had to be done in a different way. And so all of a sudden, what was impossible became literally inevitable. And so my dad ran for office after the census of 1970, which was the first census taken after the Voting Rights Act, and the redistricting of 1971, and he won. So he served in the Georgia Legislature until I got kicked out of Congress in 2002. I have seen the good that government can do. So I believe in the power of government. And I believe that the United States can do better for people in this country. The United States can do better for people around the world, because it's been my life. It's been my experience. I've seen that.
How old were you at the time you were riding on your father's shoulders?
About 4 years old when my father first put me on his shoulder in front of the Atlanta Police Department. But then after that, because my father was always protesting something, some indignity. For example, you know, you're a black police officer, you see a white person committing a crime. You can't arrest them. You have to call the white police officer to arrest the white criminal. And those are the kinds of things that my father was protesting. But then he was also a part of this larger overall movement that was seeking the franchise for black people across the South that was going to transform our country, and that really did transform our country for a moment. And so, for example, because he was always protesting, he was always under punishment. And his punishment was to serve as what they call turnkey. And that was that he guarded the civil rights protesters who were arrested by the authorities because they wanted the right to vote. And among those people that my dad always had to guard in the Atlanta jail was Dick Gregory. And so every time Dick Gregory would come to Atlanta and get locked up, he would give my father a silver dollar. Man, I had so many silver dollars, they eventually were stolen in a burglary from our home. But we had so many silver dollars because Dick Gregory got locked up so many times. But that was like something that brought our families together. And our families were brought together because they really were on the same side. Despite the fact that my father wore a policeman's uniform, he wore the policeman's uniform under punishment because of what he was trying to do for the people of the city of Atlanta, the same kind of transformative change that the civil rights movement at large was trying to bring to our country. He was a part of trying to do that for the city of Atlanta and for our state of Georgia.
And you saw him under punishment and nonetheless being able to go on and proceed with his life. You talked last night about the kinds of threats, pressures, etc. that you've experienced in the last race and maybe since then. How
Yes.
have you dealt with that kind of pressure on yourself?
My my uh, my father's name was listed in the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission list of people who needed to be watched. And so my family was watched. It was, we understood that we were being watched when my mother was talking to my aunt on the telephone one day. And, well, she hung up the phone because the conversation ended. And then she decided, oh, I need to call someone. So she picked the phone back up, and her entire conversation with my aunt was being replayed. So that was like a clue. People sitting outside in front of the house, that was like another clue. And so, you know, we've kind of lived with that. And the people sitting outside in front of the house wasn't really understood until the files of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission were opened. And then we found my dad's name there. We know about the counterintelligence program. We know about the targeting of black elected officials. We know about the activities of our own government in trying to quash dissent. We also know about the activities of our government in terms of trying to define who the, quote, spokesperson for black people was going to be before black people had the opportunity to do that for themselves. That is a direct denial of self-determination. But I discovered in a memo dated May 11th, 1965, stamped by the CIA, the language was, somewhere at the top, there must be a Negro who is clean, who could step into the vacuum in chaos once Dr. King is either exposed or assassinated. That was 3 years before Dr. King was murdered. And so what I experienced in the Georgia legislature, I served 4 years there in the Georgia legislature. And basically what happened when the authorities in the state of Georgia understood that there was going to be a new black district drawn, or a new district that was drawn to maximize the opportunity for a person of color to gain election to the United States House of Representatives from our state, that the white authorities got together and decided who that was going to be. So the Speaker of the House had his candidate, and the governor had his candidate. So the Speaker of the House had his candidate, and the governor had his candidate. But basically, what had happened was folks got behind closed doors and decided this is going to be the next United States Congressperson representing Georgia. But, of course, the choices of the governor and the Speaker of the House had nothing to do with the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of the black people in Georgia. And that was the only reason I got into the race. I've always wanted to just do one thing. That's do my schoolwork. I love to read. I love to research. And I got involved in the Georgia legislature, and that was just for 4 years. That was supposed to be for 4 years. To do the redistricting, I ran for a district that was going to be abolished because it was a malapportionment. It was drawn solely for the purpose of maintaining a white majority over the city of Atlanta in its delegation, in its county delegation to the state, because the city of Atlanta had just elected its first black mayor. And so whites wanted to maintain their control over the politics of the city of Atlanta. So they created state representative districts that were total malapportionments. In fact, the average state house district was 34,000 people. And the district that I ran for and eventually won was 600,000 people. It was the size of a congressional district. No black had ever run in that district and won. And so when I ran, I was supposed to lose. But the people intervened in that plan, and the people sent me to the Georgia Legislature. I was supposed to stay there 4 years and then continue with my education.
Knowing all this information about what was outside and surveillance on your family and so forth must have raised issues of fear. But I wonder if at age 4, sitting on your father's shoulders in demonstrations or wherever it was, if you didn't feel more secure because of being on his shoulders, then you might have perceived fear from the outside.
Oh, I had no fear. In fact, well, one time I did have fear. Well, there was one time this was when we were pressing for integration. This was for the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. The issue was public accommodations. So we sat in at a hotel. It was the ritziest hotel I had ever seen in my life. It was the Biltmore Hotel in Atlanta. And I think it was brass now as I look back on it, but at the time I thought it was gold. And the staircase was gold, the stairs were marble, and we sat there, we brought our lunches. We brought boxes of chicken lunches, and we sat there and we ate. And we sang freedom songs. I was just a kid, but you know, it was like really awe-inspiring for me. I participated in that, and it was wonderful. Then, now, the fear came when we went to Decatur, Alabama. We went to Decatur, Alabama, because a mentally retarded black male had been accused of raping a white woman. And he was, I think, going to be executed. And so we drove to Decatur, Alabama to demonstrate. Well, the Klan found out that these masses of black people were going to converge on the town, and so they decided that they would march too. And for the first time, I had never really seen that kind of hate before. I didn't understand, you know. But the members of the Klan were in their regalia, and they were armed. And those were the biggest guns I'd ever seen in my life. They had the hoods, the robes, and the guns. And then the National Guard were on both sides of the road. And as we marched, the Klan members were, you know, spewing words of hate and venom. So I've seen that.
So the National Guard, symbol of the government, stood between you and this hate at that time.
Yes.
I wonder, you talk about the fact that your father was in the Georgia Legislature from what, 1971 or 2 through 2002?
He was elected in 72 and sworn in 1973. And his tenure ended in the Georgia Legislature in 2003.
So he was in the Georgia Legislature at the same time you were?
Yes, we were in fact the country's first father-daughter legislative team.
Somebody might look at this and say, you know, you've gained your courage sitting on, and security, sitting on the shoulders of your father, and that somehow he's now out, and you're here alone, really, for the first time in your life. How do you deal with your being alone, not having him there as this support in the area you are, off your shoulders, going now for the presidency? What does that do for you emotionally?
Well, of course, it was a very sad moment when it was a very sad moment when my father lost. because it was because of my politics. People were upset with me, mainly because, well, I had asked a question about September 11th, but it really wasn't September 11th that got me, well, September 11th got me ejected from the Congress. But there was another component, and that was the Israel lobby decided that I had also asked some inconvenient questions about Palestinian rights, or the fact that Palestinians ought to be accorded human rights. And so as a result of that, the particularities of Georgia's election law were utilized in a very brutal way. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Against my father.
How did your father react to that?
My father was hurt.
Yes, and what did he do? What's happened to him, Mr. Hilton?
He supports me, and he supported me. And, but I recognize that whatever the hurt is that my family feels is nothing compared to the hurt that people in the civil rights movement felt. Medgar Evers lost his life. All we did was just lose seats and political seats. The people, the seats didn't belong to us. The seats belong to the people. So the people are really the true victims of what happened. My father would ask the question, what does Stone Mountain have to do with Palestine? But we had millions of dollars hurled at us. We had the help of Republican voters who actually created the crossover mechanism and implemented a crossover. It was what my lawyer called a malicious crossover. And horrible things were written in the paper about me, hurt my mother. My mother knew that the caricature that was being drawn of me was not me. And people people have to understand that when they decide to do things, whatever it is that goes against the grain, that this is what's going to be the result.
You talk about your hurt, but you must have some anger about it too.
Well, I understand politics in this country. And so if the rules are utilized to hold some people accountable, then I would hope that the rules would be utilized to hold other people accountable. That's all. And so, I mean, you know, to the extent that we can have a balanced playing field, that's good. That's good for America. To the extent that every point of view can be openly discussed, that's good for America. And so to the extent that we can have all of these disparate points of view come together and form a policy, then everybody whose voice was a part of the formulation of the policy can feel good about the policy, even if they didn't get everything. So I don't mind the rules being exercised in the way that they were, but what I do mind is when the rules are broken.
Yes, and you also talk about to the extent that it can be talked about, but pretty well people have been talking about how that extent is very different for very people and different people. That exposure in the larger media is controlled and limited. During this time, did you have the same kind of exposure? Was there transparency? That you had equal access to be able to get your message out, what was happening out to the people who were going on?
Yeah,
And if not, isn't there some anger about the lack of that equality, about the lack of transparency, which is a big issue now, that you feel? And does it motivate you to want to do something about creating a better equality or better transparency?
well, I don't know that anger is an accurate description of what I might feel. I might feel outraged. And so, you know, the same kind of outrage that America felt when Rosa Parks was arrested, or the same kind of outrage that people felt when, for that matter, Homer Plessy was arrested for sitting in a white train. The kind of outrage that would exist, for example, with my father when he was arrested for drinking out of the white water fountain. And it's that, I mean, you can accept that. Look at the probably millions of times across the South that segregation was accepted. But it's the few times when it wasn't accepted that become the catalyst for change.
And how do you take that and looking at what you did and present and move toward change? What do you present to make that less likely to happen again?
Well, I think it's important, for example, when I asked the question on September 11th, nobody wanted to acknowledge the fact that I was the first person to ask what happened on that day. Where was our government? How come they didn't protect us? And I understood historically that the role of a black woman is not to question this government. I understood that. So I had stepped outside of the bounds that had been accorded to me. Even as a member of Congress, I shouldn't act as if I had any authority. But as a result of me asking the question, a whole lot of other people started asking the question. And now we have a worldwide 911 truth movement. That's important. When I decided to challenge Secretary Rumsfeld about the war games that were going on September 11th, about the $2.3 trillion that were missing, about the Pentagon's inability to balance its own books, and therefore the United States government can't balance its books. Those were direct confrontations, but that wasn't the first time that I had done that. I had done it to Madeleine Albright, did it to Colin Powell. It was the way I conducted what I considered to be an important role of the Congress, which was oversight over the executive branch. But it was that particular exchange with Rumsfeld that captured the imagination of a lot of people. And now we've got young people who have formed an organization, a worldwide organization. And the name of that organization is We Are Change. WeAreChange.org. And what do? They go out and confront the decision makers and let the decision makers know that us little people out here, we know what you did. We know, and we're not going to accept it. So the fact that that exchange with Rumsfeld was captured and captured the imagination of folks, has contributed to the emboldening of young people in this country. That's a beautiful thing. So immediately I can say that what we're responsible for, this little bit of pain that I felt, is nothing compared to what it has spawned. And what it spawned is beautiful, active citizenship.
So one might, in listening to that, say that you're looking for the nomination, trying to run for president, is at least as much to bring ideas, to stimulate people and stimulate movements to challenge as it is to actually achieving the presidency itself.
Well, of course, I'd love to be able to sign in my new address as 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But I also understand that what we're involved in, hopefully, is the creation of a movement that is vital to the future of this country. I was a direct beneficiary of a movement. And to the extent that the generation ahead of me created a movement that literally changed my life, and then something happened. Well, we know the something that happened was that the folks on the other side of that movement who were against the movement, they didn't just stop breathing. They didn't stop planning. They got busy, and they began to plan ways in which to quash the movement that had been built, to quell the dissent that was building. And they were pretty darn successful. So now, unfortunately, as I am a mother, and I look to secure the dignity of my son, what I discover is that the mechanisms that I had to secure my dignity and the dignity for my generation are not there for my son to secure his own dignity. So we've got to create that all over again. And the greatest gift I think that we can give to the generation of our children is, one, the ability to think critically and to analyze their situation, but then the knowledge to use that analysis in order to improve the conditions that they face.
So you yourself personally, in your way of being, agree with what Jefferson said, that the tree of liberty has to be nourished with the blood of patriots.
Well, I've seen the blood of patriots. And I guess you could say I've stung a little bit for trying to be patriotic. It's okay.